All right, good evening, Uplift Church, and all those joining us for our Wednesday night Revelation Bible study. And I hope that you're doing well and that everything is going well with you and that you've had a great week so far. It's been exciting. A lot of stuff going around, and that brings us to our Revelation study because it has been really good as well. Our eyes have been open as we have been learning a lot about Revelation and the end of times and what this looks like for us as um, Christians, what it looks like for us as Americans. And then right in the middle of this, we have our election going on right now and still waiting the results of that. And we're just leaving it all in the hands of God because He's got this. And so, just to kind of recap where we're at right now, if you are joining us tonight, and you know that I have been referring to this timeline nearly every week to give you an idea of where we're at in the events. And so, let's see which way I got to turn to. All right, so starting all the way over here, we have our introduction, and we're going all the way across. So we have the seven seals, the seven trumpets. We talked about seven different people that were mentioned in chapters 12 through 13. When now we're to this seven vials. Last week we had this interval in heaven, and now we're to the seven vial or to the seven bowl judgments. But with that, there was an interval in there that we talked about last week, and here there's uh, another prelude to what's getting ready to take place. And what this does is something marvelous for us as readers. And we have been going through our book, uh, Max Lucado's book, and with his book, Life Lessons from Revelation, it's been a great guide. We've been taking a few weeks and going a little bit deeper on certain topics because it's not covered in our book. And for example, like tonight, we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 15 and 16. And Revelation 15, you get the prelude to Revelation 17. And the reason why this is such a big deal is because you're going to get to see something really neat out of this. And so if you look with me at Revelation chapter 15, we're just going to dive into this and we're going to try to get through this in a span of about 30 minutes. And it's really neat what we see through here. If you have questions about tonight, then please post them on here. If I don't get to it tonight, then I promise you I will come back and we will address those. If what? So hopefully this is working tonight and that you can hear me. So I don't know anything else to do. So we'll see what else happens from there. All right, so Revelation chapter 15 is where we're at. And looking at these first two verses, we have a neat situation that's kind of brought out. So we had this interlude or this interval that was in last week's, but this one, John, the writer, begins to see something else. He says in verse 1, and I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous. Now, if you remember, we've had some pretty tough judgments that's been poured out up to this point. And so for him to say, hey, this is great and marvelous. All right, so here's a little bit of encouragement. And he says, seven angels having the seven last plagues, for in them is filled up with the wrath of God. Now, you had this great picture. He says, and they're filled with the wrath of God. But what this is that this is given kind of an idea, this is given a prelude to these seven bowl judgments. And so before these judgments, this is also before the third woe. But what God is doing through here, if you look at verse 2, and I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass having harps of God. Now, this is the encouragement. This is the awesome picture that John is painting for us, is that through this tribulation, There is a time in which the false prophet and the Antichrist will try to force worship. They want to force this control, and they want you to bow down to this image that has been erected. And to show your allegiance, you'll take the beast of the mark, or mark of the beast. You're going to take this, and what's going to happen is that when you do that, you're sealing your fate. You've showed your allegiance to this satanic system. What John is showing us here is that there's people that have not given in to the satanic system, that they have not taken the beast. They did not fall down and bow down and worship. They are gods. They are looking for God. They are seeking God. And here it says, I'm seeing them. Now, again, this is a prelude to what's taking place. These people are having to overcome through the tribulation. Now, again, this is a vision of what is getting ready to take place. And so I want you to understand that there are going to be people that will make it through the tribulation time without taking the mark of the beast, that will make it to, let's say, the end time with God and not end up in eternal punishment. And these are those that John saw. Now, what I love is that what they did here is how they overcome through their faith and their patience, their perseverance. They overcome all this. Now, keep in mind that with Satan and all of his evil forces, they're controlling money and food, because you can neither buy nor sell unless you take the mark of the beast. So these people that come through the tribulation, it's going to be a terrible time because they're not going to take the mark. So they're literally going to have to depend on the Lord for their food. It makes me think of the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. They're going to be dependent on him, on the Lord, for their daily bread. And then you get to verses 3 and 4, and there's a celebration unlike no other. And this is similar to the celebration that we saw in Egypt through the crossing of the Red Sea. So whenever Moses led them across the sea, when they got to the other side, they had this worship experience in which they really praised God. And this is it's a similar victory to that we're seeing. And what they sung here was, in verse 3, they sung the song of Moses. So a song, either that song that they sung or one similar. And it says, and the song of the Lamb, great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty, just and true are thy ways, the King of saints. Now this is pretty neat, because there was a song that was sung earlier by the 144,000 that no one can sing, but this is a song that all could sing. And what this does, it just gives us reassurance that yes, there's going to be people that's going to make it through the tribulation, and that even though it's going to be tough, and even though it's going to be very difficult, they're going to make it through. And this is some encouragement for that, because as we go through Revelation, we've had these 7 seal judgments and the 7 trumpets. I mean, it's been some pretty harsh stuff. But if you look back at verse 1, these 7 angels, they have wrath of God. So what's getting ready to get poured out? Verse 5. After that I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. And these 7 angels, they came out having these 7 plagues. These 7 plagues. Look at verse 7, what these vials, these bowls. So they're either referred to as the vial judgments or the bowl judgments. And it really depends on what translation of the Bible that you use. If you use King James, it's going to say vials. If you look in maybe the Holman or the NIV, something else, it may say bowl. But basically all we're saying is, not necessarily a cup, but they're saying a bowl. It's just got wrath of God is in it, and it's going to be poured out. So if you look at verse 7, it says the 7 angels, 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God. And with that wrath we're seeing here is that the temple was filled with smoke for the glory of God. Church, sin will be punished. And what we're seeing here, this is this glimpse of what's going to take place. Sin will be punished. And here is the wrath of God is getting ready to be poured out. And I'm so thankful that my sin was taken care of a long time ago on Calvary. And I've accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior for my sins. And I will not taste this wrath of God. But it is so all powerful, mighty, that this wrath is it's filled with smoke from the glory of God. This whole temple was just filled with smoke from the glory of God. God is that pure. And look at what the angels are wearing in verse 6. Pure and white linen, having their breastplates girded with golden girdles. And what does this mean to us? They were pure. They represent the purity of God. These angels, they were pure. And they had been commanded to carry out these vows. And what we're seeing in chapter 15 is this prelude to the wrath of God, of what's getting ready to take place. In church, what this is, with this filled with smoke, it is here. The wrath of God is here. Are you ready for it? Because in chapter 16, we have the wrath of God. There are 7 judgments that get poured out through here. And we see these, it's pretty much in synchronous order between the first going through the 7th. And we see this in chapter 16 in 21 verses. And we're going to cover these kind of briefly because we have the first one. Verse 1. Chapter 16. And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, go your ways, pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. So the first one went in verse 2. And poured out his vial upon the earth. And with this first vial, this first bowl judgment, there was grievous sores. King James says the word grievous. And there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men. But what's so neat about this is that it only affected those. Look at that verse 2. Grievous sores upon the men which had the mark of the beast and upon them which worship his image. So you see how this is showing us that even yet, this is how people's going to be able to make it through here. Remember, chapter 15 was the prelude to those who's going to make it through all the tribulation. And we've seen before that some get martyred. Well, here there's people going to live through this because they've not taken it, and they are not going to see this judgment. Only those who have submitted to the beast, either through worship or through taking the mark. Verse 3 is very interesting because you have this second judgment that's poured out. Look at verse 3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as blood of dead man. Every living soul died in the sea. Now, we saw something similar to this, didn't we? Already. Well, let's back up even further. You're going to see this in Exodus chapter 7. It reminds us of the first plague in Egypt when the waters turned as blood. And with this, in this judgment, though, all in the sea died. Everything in the sea died. Not just a few, but all. We also saw this in the second trumpet judgment when a third of the waters turned bloody and it died. Well, you're seeing something similar to that. So before, remember when we talked about this a few weeks ago, it was just a small taste of the wrath of God. Now we're getting the full wrath of God. The full wrath of God. So in verse 3, you had the sea water turned to blood. Well, the third judgment, the third bowl, the third vial in verse 4 is poured out upon the rivers and upon the fountains. So this is the water that would impact us, like living in near, let's say our rivers, our streams, our water supply. So basically this is inland water that is turned to blood. Man. So that means that all water supply is completely polluted. From this point forward, all water supply is polluted, unable to be consumed. You think about that. That's going to be tough. Verse 5 says, And I heard the angel of the water say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged this. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. Verse 5 through 7 is very interesting because heaven itself gives justification for this terrible judgment. And these judgments is the only one that it does that. Now, why does it do that when it affects the water supply, the inland water supply? Because when you impact the water, you impact the life. We can't live without it. We need it. We need the water. And here it is polluted. Verse 7 is another confirmation. He said, I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. So we may look at this and wonder, oh man, that sounds so terrible. How could God do this? Everything is justified and it is known. And everything has been leading up to this point, to this wrath of God. Everything has been coming to this head. And remember what we said in chapter 15 with that the smoke filling up the temple? Oh man, the wrath of God, it is here. It is here. So that was the third bowl judgments and the justification that heaven gives for that. So then you have the fourth judgment, the fourth bowl. And that's verse 8. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. So this one is great heat from the sun. In the previous judgments, the sun had been darkened. You see that in Revelation chapter 8. But now the heat in the sun is increased. And anyone that's ever been to the desert, if you ever talk to anyone that's fought overseas, they know how relentless the desert can be. You cannot escape the heat. And it just radiates from the ground. You cannot escape it. Now remember, we had these other two judgments, the second and the third, that affected the water supply. So it's not like you can just jump in the water and cool yourself off or even get yourself a drink. Now, again, if you look at this as a whole, so they've got sores on them. All right, they can't use the seas for anything productive. Their water supply is now polluted, and now they cannot escape the heat. That's going to be torture. It's going to be torture. With the useless water system, it's going to be torture. Very hard. It's very hard to think of. In verse 10 through 11, we see that the sun is going to do something different. The sun is going to do something different. Well, let me back up to verse 9. I skipped over something. Let me back up to there. In verse 9, because what's going to happen is whenever that sun is going to scorch them, look at verse 9. It says, And the men were scorched with great heat and blasphemed the name of God, which hath the power of these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. Even after all of this, they still will not turn to God. It's amazing, isn't it? Okay. I just wanted to say that. So you get to the fifth judgment, the fifth bowl, and it says the angel poured out his vial upon the sea of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain, and blasphemed God of heaven because of their pain and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. This is not worldwide. This is directly impacting the satanic system that we talked about last week and the one before. The satanic system where we had the false prophet, the Antichrist, and Satan. The kingdom that he has established, it's particularly geared towards him. People of this are what's going to be impacted. It's basically only to those that have sealed their fate, the mark of the beast, and it's going to be to the beast, his throne, his kingdom. This reminds us of what happened in Exodus whenever God sent a plague to Egypt, and about the darkness, and all was dark except for Goshen. And the Goshen Valley is where the Israelites lived. Isn't that interesting? And so, see, this is going to be impacted to. This shows again that glimpse that there's going to be some that's going to survive through this. It's not going to taste this because they're not going to experience that part because they've not sold out to the beast. In verses 12 through 16, you have the sixth bowl judgment. And through this, the Euphrates dries up. And this famous river, it's mentioned elsewhere in Revelation, particularly in chapter 9, when the sixth trumpet sounded. But what this Euphrates River, when it dries up, it allows free passage for this buildup that's getting ready to take place. And if you have seen this, it's quite amazing because what they're going to do is that with this, they are going to take this as an opportunity to round up to fight against God. What is this setting up for? The Battle of Armageddon. Okay, so again, this is the sixth angel. And what they're doing, if you look at verse 14, and for they are spirits of the devils working miracles which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to battle that great day of God Almighty. We're getting ready to see it. The Battle of Armageddon. Is God worried? No, he's not worried. Not at all. Look at verse 15. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. What are they doing? They're preparing for battle. Verse 16. And he gathered them together in a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Now, I thought this was neat. Armageddon comes from two Hebrew words. It means har, Mageddon. It means the hill of Mageddon. And Mageddon means place of troops or place of slaughter. So it is also called the plain of Esdraelon or the valley of Jezreel. So I encourage you to write this down and Google it. Google the valley of Jezreel. So when you get a chance, Google that, valley of Jezreel. And some of you may be doing that right now. Well, what's so neat about this is that if you Google it and you want to see some pictures of this, you're going to see a vast valley. Huge. And from the hilltop up here, you're going to be perfectly able to see that this will be a great place of battle. But this is going to make anything that you've ever seen in the movies look small compared to this battle and what is beginning to get set up. I'm talking the famous battles of Lord of the Rings or any of those movies that you've ever seen. This is going to be something unlike anyone has ever seen or experienced before, because this is literally nation and nation that's gathered together against God. So that's preparing. So the sixth bowl judgment dries up the Euphrates River, but what it does is really make preparation and able for them to mobilize to this valley to fight against God. All this is a part of God's plan. It's pretty neat, isn't it? God's got a plan. He knows what he's doing. We already know the outcome of this battle, don't we? Well, you're going to see that again in Revelation chapter 19. But again, remember, we'll get to that. So this is becoming towards that battle, all right? It's not there yet. They're preparing for the battle. It's not there yet. Okay. In verse 17, you get the seventh bowl judgment. I like this. Seventh bowl judgment. And it says in verse 17, and the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, it is done. Whoa. It is done. It is done. Now, what's so neat about that is that you can tell what's getting ready to take place. It is done. It says, and there were voices and thunders and lightnings. There was a great earthquake. So with this seventh bowl judgment, there's going to be an earthquake, but this earthquake is going to be unlike any other earthquakes, because what's going to happen? Well, it says, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty of earthquake and so great. It's going to be, it is going to be an earthquake so unreal that no one has ever seen it before. Anything like it. It's going to be the most powerful earthquake, and so powerful. Look at verse 19. And the great city was divided into three parts. It's going to be so huge, such a great earthquake. It's going to divide, and not only that, the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. That's how bad this earthquake is going to be. And there fell, verse 21, and there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven. So you just look at this. They got sores on them. It doesn't matter. They're preparing for battle. Their sea is useless. It doesn't matter. They're preparing for battle. They have no water supply to drink it of. It doesn't matter. They're preparing for battle. They've got all this is taking place, and it does not matter. They're still preparing for battle. They've got the sores, no water. I just can't believe that all this has happened, and they still not turned to God. They still not. Look at the rest of 21. It said, and there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent, and men's blaspheming God because of the plague of hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great. They were cursing God because of what they were experiencing, and they still did not turn to him. They still did not turn to God. Pretty amazing, isn't it? So with this, Satan's empire is about to be judged. You can see that now it's breaking down. This is huge because the seventh bowl judgment is pretty much a blow to the satanic kingdom. We saw in verse 5, or with 5 and 6, with the fifth one, we have this darkness, and this darkness fell upon this kingdom. Well, here we're seeing this one really impact his kingdom in such a way that it's literally broken and divided. They're having hell fire down upon them. It's not pleasant, is it? It's not even pleasant to even think about. Well, let's look at this again. What is this for us as Christians? Well, I think the answer for that is back up in verse 15. We still have a warning in amongst all this, even to us today. We have a warning. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. What should we do in all this? What should we do when it comes to the end of times? When it comes to our relationship with God, when it comes to election results, when it comes to all this stuff coming to a head, what should we do? Church, what he's telling them is that we need to be ready. We always need to be ready. Ready for what? To trust in the Lord. Okay? We're to trust him with our salvation. We're to trust him with our future. We're to trust him with our country and our president. We need to trust in the Lord. If we trust in the Lord, I promise you, we have nothing to worry about. Our hope is in Jesus. And even through this, he's telling us, be ready. Be ready. May you be ready tonight. I hope that you've enjoyed this Revelation study. I encourage you next week to look at chapters 17 and 18. It is not in our book. It picks back up in chapter 19. So next week we're going to look at chapter 17 and 18. When through this, you're going to see some of this final victory that we're getting ready to see, and also the fate of Babylon. Babylon is this the kingdom that belongs to Satan. We learned about that last week. We're going to see its fall. And we're getting ready to see some good, glorious stuff come out of this Revelation study, and it's going to be awesome. So I hope you've enjoyed tonight, that you've got something out of it. And please, if you have any other questions, Lindsay asked the valley. That was the Valley of Jezreel. You can Google that. You can see those images of that valley. It's just huge. It's a big plain. It's really, really neat. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the study tonight. I hope you've been enjoying this through Revelation, as we've really tried to learn and understand and grasp the end of times and what that looks like. But again, the church has been raptured and heaven is our home. I hope you've enjoyed tonight. Good night.